Congratulations on the film. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Can you tell us, Mr. Rolat, the first time you had some notion that this story should be a film?
I wasn't thinking of the film. I was thinking of the great, not necessarily event, but of that great violin, such a wonderful violin, what it meant for that great man. And as I explained in the movie, how beautiful and how right it would be for that violin to come back to Częstochowa, but not just to Częstochowa, to that place which was really sacred for all the entire Jewish community of Częstochowa, but also for the Huberman family, for my family. Now, the fact that it was the Huberman violin in the hands of the greatest living violinist, well, that was certainly, I would say, something special that I would bring to my native Częstochowa. And by the way, I must tell you that Częstochowa is no longer just the Częstochowa Philharmonic, it is now the Huberman Philharmonic of Częstochowa.
Joshua, you get asked to play all over the world. Was there, you recall a moment where, okay, we're going to now connect this violin with the place where it's from?
Well, it's an amazing thing that I got along with, for my $4 million, I also got not only a great violin, but it allowed me to be connected to this incredible story. By the way, it's worth a lot more than that now, but it was an incredible thing that, I fell in love with the violin, as I said in the story, like so immediately, and I loved the violin. And of course, I grew up knowing about Huberman. My teacher, Joseph Gingold, who I went to when I was 12 years old, he was a student of Isai and had met all the greats like Kreisler and Huberman and all those, and he had a picture of Huberman on his wall. As a 12-year-old, Gingold would tell me stories about the great Huberman, and so he was sort of this legendary, mythical figure for me. And then when I bought this violin, certainly it was a factor. Knowing it was played by Huberman was an amazing thing for me to pick up and play on the violin that was played by this person who was really a legend in my mind, and someone I'd grown up with hearing about. So, but as a result, I was asked to be part of this because I have Huberman. I think they were forced to ask me because I had the Huberman violin, and this. It's an incredible thing to be connected to this, and I didn't even know. Of course, I knew about Huberman. I knew he started the Israel Philharmonic, with whom that orchestra I play often. But I did not really know the story quite the way I learned from this film, and it's really incredible. So anyway, having this violin is, when I come to the Israel Philharmonic, I get treated a little nicely because I have this wonderful violin in my hands that was Huberman's.
I've seen the film twice, and each time I think, as if you can take yourself into the mind of a violin, go be that other violin that day when you're in Great Britain and you go by the Huberman violin and you come, as you say in the film, you go play it that night,
right?
Royal Albert Hall.
Same night.
Your other violin kind of looking at you like,
oh.
I'm a pretty good violin too,
It was. I had a Stradivarius. I owned a Stradivarius, a beautiful Stradivarius, coming into that day, if I could have afforded to keep both of them, I would have. But it is actually quite unusual that one would want to play the same night. Usually it takes months and months to get used to a violin, but somehow it was just a chemistry that I knew I just didn't want to play on anything else.
Mr. Rolat, one of the parts of the film that really intrigues me is when you first come here to the United States and you eventually end up in Cincinnati. How long was it before you started to talk to friends, to family, about what you went through back in Poland?
Well, my daughter is here Stand up, Samantha. Samantha. And she will tell you we didn't really talk very much about, well, she knew, of course, the story. She knew how I lost my parents. She knew about what happened to my brother. And she knew where I came from. You see, I had my own march of the living. My march of the living consisted not only of showing my children the German death camps. I wanted really to know, I wanted them to know our history and our long history of living in Poland. Mm-hmm. Our history, just as Mr. Bell's mother talks about where their family came from in Poland. Remember, 80% of American Jews trace their heritage to Poland. Mm-hmm. I wanted my children to know our history, our joint history with the Polish people in Poland, and I wanted them to see Częstochowa. And so before my son's bar mitzvah, before my daughter's bat mitzvah, I took my children to Poland.
So what was the first time you went back? Do you remember what year or around what year?
Yes, I went back to Poland in 1968 with my son, Jeffrey. I then went with Samantha just around the time that communism collapsed thanks to the Solidarity movement. Mm-hmm. And Samantha and my younger daughter, Amanda, visited Poland at that time for 7-8 days in 1989. Mm-hmm. And since then, of course, I've been coming to Poland quite often because now we are witnessing a wonderful, really, revival of Jewish life in Poland.
What was it like the first time you went back? The movie has kind of a sweetness about it in terms of you going to Poland and being in Poland.
Well,
the
it
first
was a
time,
very...
Were you at all skeptical? Should I go or not?
Very skeptical. I mean, for one thing, I spent at that time in Oświęcim, in Auschwitz, I spent some 3.5 hours, and the guide, after showing us all there is to see in Oświęcim, he never mentioned once the name Żydzi, Jews. Mm-hmm. You see, at that time, the communists actually talked only about Jews were at that time, remember this was after 1968, when there was this very, very unpleasant communist operation, as a result of which a good portion of Polish Jews left Poland. Those that remained in Poland at that time, I would say probably 40-50% of those at that time had to leave Poland. Mm-hmm. And so it was a very, actually the 1968 experience was not all that nice, although this was also right after the 1967 war, at the time when the Arabs were supported by the Russians. Mm-hmm. And I must say that the people that we've met, the taxi drivers and the others, were actually very happy about us visiting, and they were telling us that, you've really given it to them. In other words, they identified the Arabs with the Russians. Right. You understand? Right. So we were actually the good guys.
Right. Right. In 1968 in Poland, if you were associated with the Russians, that was not so popular.
No.
Just quickly,
I will also,
sure.
Just to, you see, I wanted to mention that when Joshua played in Częstochowa, this was actually the first of 2 concerts which you gave. Mm-hmm. The afternoon of that concert, that memorial to those Jews shipped to Treblinka was unveiled. That evening, he gave that concert at the synagogue. The next day, we had Vice President Biden in in Warsaw, and I was showing him here where our museum will be built, as you see. I'm showing it to him here. And in the evening, there was a very beautiful and a very important concert, because that was a benefit for our museum. Present in the audience was also the First Lady of Poland, the Minister of Culture, and Joshua repeated actually that same Brahms concerto which you played in Częstochowa. We've chosen the Brahms concerto because you understand now, after seeing this movie, this violin concerto, which until Huberman played it before Brahms, was called not the violin concerto, but the anti-violin concerto. And we played it, you played it. I thought that it should be really the Brahms concerto played in our synagogue there, and also the next day at the museum. The museum was opened a month ago in Warsaw. I really invite all of you to come and visit it, because it's really the only such museum. You probably have seen the press and so on, and those who've seen it. And I must say, we cannot wait until in our auditorium there, Joshua will play again. Would it be again?
Anytime.
Or what do you think?
No, let's do something else.
Joshua, you mentioned that, and by the way, you were handed out cards at the beginning of the evening. We'll be reading from your questions in just a few minutes, and also Joshua will be signing CDs, I believe, after the show, right outside. You mentioned the Hubermans on your wall when you're growing up in Indiana.
Yeah. Well, he is now. He was on the wall in my teacher's studio.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Now I have him on my wall,
Okay.
as well as a picture, by the way, of Huberman and Einstein. I think it's with my violin. I'm not sure. It's hard to tell. They're both holding a violin. Huberman and Einstein. They were friends, I guess.
Of course, the caption is, "Who are those two guys with this beautiful violin?"
Right.
Did you have some sense growing up when things started to happen for you and you start traveling, and it becomes clear this is going to become a lot more than just a hobby for
Right.
you? Is it clear to you, like, there's history behind all this too? And did you kind of embrace that history, or are there moments as a kid of, I just want to play the music?
Well, I mean, as a classical musician, your history is part of it at all times. I mean,
Right.
You're intertwined. Everything has to do with history, and so that's wasn't a new concept. Every time I learned a new piece, it was always associated with some bit of history. And the first time I saw Stradivarius violin was my teacher, Gingold again. Gingold, who was of course Jewish, emigrated from Russia as a youngster. But his violin, he used to let me play his violin in lessons. Every once in a while, he'd let me play a few notes on it, and it would get my hairs standing up and imagining someday owning my own. And he would talk about the history of his violin and the year. His violin was made in 1683, and the history with my violin also is. It goes. I mean, Huberman, and then before that, it goes back 300 years, and it's pretty an awesome thing to pick that up every day. And I love the historical part of it. I mean, it's just so amazing to be connected to that history.
You mentioned in the film that it is somewhat inexplicable when you start to describe why is this instrument what it is. Having said that, and they often say the death of comedy is trying to explain why a joke is funny.
Right.
So if you're sitting, imagine that we're all aficionados here, and if you're sitting amongst other great classical musicians, is there a language that you can use that really does explain why this one separates from the others?
It is hard to say, but I think for a language that everyone would understand is that which, I mean, I think of it like if you've ever heard Pavarotti sing, there's something about his voice. There's something magical. Right. There are a lot of great singers, but then someone like Pavarotti sings, and there's something that just gives you goosebumps. There's something about the complexity of the sound and the overtones that is hard to explain, but you know it when you hear it. And then the same thing goes when you pick up a great violin like a Stradivarius. By the way, if you've seen these stories that love to make headlines, about how that it's all of, that they did an experiment where they played modern violins and they came out equal or ahead of the Stradivarius, that it's all a big sham, this is not true. There's no doubt about it that there's something special. The problem with those experiments is that if I were to play a scale for you and play as loud as I can to try to see what the violin sounds like, I could probably play any instrument and it wouldn't make an impact. But what the impact really is subtle, and it's what you can do with the music, this color, the tone colors, and the emotion that you can extract from the music. Somehow, it's just having a violin like a Strad. It just allows you to do it in a different way, and that takes time and not in a 10-second experiment. It's something that takes place. So anyway, it's an amazing thing. I can't really describe it. The physics of it, we're still trying to figure out. But there's something. It's a perfect storm, really. The Stradivarius, it's sort of perfect storm as far as the time it was made, the location, the craftsmanship, the history up till that point, that the tricks and the methods that have been passed down until that time. Something about that early part of the 18th century, Guarneri and Stradivari and Amati, where it was just
at the same time,
sort of around the same town, Cremona, Italy.
Have you gone to the town?
Sorry?
Have you gone to
I
the
have.
town?
I've performed there a couple of times.
Do you think they mentioned the lacquer? Do you think that it may have something to do with the lacquer they use?
The lacquer, the varnish. That's part of it. They say it's sort of magic. The trees that were cut down, the weather and the wood at the time, that you can't just go out and take a piece of wood and copy a Strad and expect it to sound the same. So there are a lot of things, and then so it's hard to know. But
is there anything different about a performance in the hometown of Stradivarius?
Well, it's again, we're back to the history again.
Sure.
There's something it affects you, and it affects the way you feel, and you imbue that in your music and on the instrument. So it's something special to do that.
Mr. Rolat, my grandfather, as I told you before, the movie was from Suwałki, Poland, which is in the northeast corner of Poland, near Belarus, near Lithuania. He came here about 100 years ago by himself as a teenager. His whole family stayed in Poland. They wrote letters back and forth in the 20s and 30s, and then the letters stopped. And then in the late 40s, I think a nephew came over who had survived the war and confirmed what my grandfather already knew, that they had been killed in the war. My question is, and my father served in Europe and liberated, was one part of the unit that liberated Nordhausen in Germany, one of the camps in Germany. My question is, if I had said to my grandfather, and he died many years ago, but if I had said as a teenager, let's go back to Poland, he would have given me a look. Why would I want to do that? Now, there's no right or wrong here. Certain survivors want to go back, certain survivors do not. Why did you want to go back?
Well, that's true. And I must tell you, Suwałki happened to be one of those small towns, we call them shtetl, where in many cases the Jewish people were a majority of the population. Right. And on the whole, you have to remember, we lived together for almost 1,000 years. And we lived mainly, actually, in harmony. But there were also unpleasant incidents. And you also have to remember that those people who, let's say, left 100 years ago, at that time it wasn't even Poland, it was divided Poland under the Russians, Austrians, and Germans. But they left because they were poor, and they wanted to come to the United States because that was the promised land. And I must say that today, and in the last few years, when we tried to collect money for the building of this museum, I found great opposition from quite a few people here among my co-religionists. I can only tell you that if they went today to Poland, as I do, and as more and more of them come to Poland nowadays, and if they, for example, participated, as many of them now do, in the festivals. We have, for example, here, Janusz Makuk. Stand up, Janusz. He started for the first time 25 years ago, 26 years ago actually, the first Jewish festival in Krakow, still under the communists. That festival only lasted 2 hours, and he found himself in jail. Today, it's easily the biggest Jewish festival in the world. On the last day, in the former Jewish area of Krakow, which is Jewish since the time of Casimir the Great, who invited the Jews at the time of the Spanish Inquisition to come to Poland. And they settled, as they settled, for example, in Zamość, that place where Count Zamoyski lived for the last 500-600 years, the same count who gave the violin, your violin, to Huberman, right? Now, why am I talking about it? Because on the last day of that festival, some 20,000 young people congregate to hear the last concert after 8 days of this festival. And I invite many of my friends to the first floor. Actually, first floor in Poland is our second floor. And you see from the windows there, those 6-7 hours, because the concert starts at 6 p.m. and it lasts until 2 a.m., 2 a.m. And you have, if you look to the left, what do you see? You see the repetition of all the klezmers, cantors, and so on. But when you look to the right, you see from these windows, 20,000 young people. If you would see how they sing, dance, how they enjoy themselves, how they participate in all of that. And you have to remember, 95-97% of them are Polish Catholics. The rest are Jews from all over the world. Now, imagine now such a festival, and it's repeated on a smaller scale in Warsaw, in Wrocław, in other smaller places. Imagine if this festival were held today in Paris or Brussels. You would need a battalion of police there. I would ask those people here, and there are probably a few, who were part of those festivals in Poland, and they will all tell you, every single person, they don't feel any danger, quite the contrary. So, and also, I'll tell you, I don't want to monopolize this conversation, but our museum opened 2 months ago, and I can tell you that the admission price by Polish standards is not all that little. It's about $12. And on Mondays, the entry is free, right? And I had a friend who just came here 2 weeks ago, and on the way to the airport, he passed the museum, and he said, you know what, on Mondays, I saw this line of people almost 1 kilometer long. So now these are all Polish people, how interested they are now to visit our museum. Now, all of that, I think, should be appreciated. And if I am accused that in my old age I've become a builder, that I build bridges, well, I'm very, very proud of that, because these are bridges of understanding. And I think that and if one of those elements in those bridges is that we are able to hear this easily the greatest violinist today on that historic violin, that really deserves applause.
Well, along the lines of building bridges, now I know you for all of about an hour and a half now. But you seem like a positive person. You seem like a person who is optimistic. This will be done. This will happen. For example, the concert. Okay, that's in the film.
Well,
So my
thank you for
question-
that, because then at least the bridges will be safe to cross.
Well, you've done a great thing here. So that my question is, at the risk of playing amateur psychologist, how does one experience what you experienced? How does one see what you see, and still, years later, become a person who built a successful business, obviously a successful life here in New York and in America, and not just that, but go back and make positive bridges in the place where you saw such horror?
Well, the horror I saw was perpetrated by the Germans. I mean, if you could carry that a bit forward, you know. I was quite hurt when so soon after the war I saw all my Jewish friends in the United States and in Israel who were driving almost exclusively German cars. Mm-hmm. And they lived with it quite well. And I must say, Germany also after the war did quite a bit to re-educate the young people and so on. I can only tell you that the young people whom I meet today in Poland are almost universally very, very interested in finding out about our joint history. And I think that any of you who will visit Poland through the new portal, which is our museum, I think that you will agree with me that it will be a trip well worthwhile making.
Okay. Joshua, one more for you before we get to your questions, and that is, again, you've played concerts all over the world, and you talked about some of these places that are obviously special because of the history. When you're playing a piece that you've played more than a few times, mm-hmm. is there a way to approach it in a new way? Is there a way to keep it fresh and not have it seem like, well, I'm playing the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto for the 383rd time here tonight?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something we deal with all the time. We're playing things that have been played not only by me. I probably played the Tchaikovsky or the Brahms 500 to 1,000 times in performance. But it's not only that; it's been played by other people millions of times. And what do you have to say? The thing is, the great pieces. That's the remarkable thing about the great classics, is that they're so profound. I mean, the great classical composers are really a handful in a century, and they've created things that are so incredible and so deep and so encompass all human emotion in one piece. The Brahms is not just a happy piece, a sad piece, this or that. It encompasses so many things. So each time you look at it, you bring to it new emotions, things that have happened in your life. You can keep finding new things in it. So I mean, it sounds a little bit cliche, that every time is a new experience, but it really is true that you can always find things, and it's just laziness if you just play the way you've been playing it before, and since that's sort of worked, and you do need to challenge yourself to keep looking, and it's amazing how much you just keep finding in these great works. So this is never gets bored. I'm never bored of either the Tchaikovsky or the Brahms or the Beethoven or the Bach. I can't remember ever getting bored with the great music.
Much like the listener, who you hear a piece of great music and okay, be it in whatever form.
Well, it's an amazing thing about great music is that unlike films, you don't want to see no matter how great the film is, you probably don't want to see it 10 times. Maybe there are a few of really great films.
Casablanca.
Casablanca, even.
You're
Maybe, but classical music, I think, like it's an art form where each time it just gets better and better. The more you know a piece, the better it is. That's also why audiences keep asking for the darn Brahms Violin Concerto.
Right. Well,
that's the one they know, and they want to hear it again. So it is an amazing thing. It's that the more you hear it, the more you get out of it, the more you enjoy it.
Well, that's an issue for people in the classical music world. I've interviewed for this one-on-one series that I do, which we interviewed you for. Alan Gilbert when he was starting with the New York Philharmonic and talking about, okay, they want to hear, sorry about the cliche, but they want to hear the greatest hits, but you need to introduce new material as well, or kind of, I don't think the word edgy is part of the classical music.
Find the right balance.
Right. Let's get to some questions. For Joshua, this is for you. I loved your recent HBO documentary. Do you have others in progress?
Other HBO? Well, the sequel to Game of Thrones is, that the HBO, which most of you may not know about, was a documentary, of sort of a masterclass series that they have, which on HBO, that I did one episode, and I had some young students that I worked with for a week or so, and they followed us around playing concerts and rehearsing. So it was something fun to do. I enjoy working with young people. I'm at a time in my life where I'm starting to feel, that I want to give back a little bit. I feel like up till this point I've just been taking and taking and taking, and from generosity of others, and I feel like I'm so lucky to do what I do. I have to say, being around this man and watching a film about Huberman, who's someone who really gave back so much. As artists, it is sort of a selfish endeavor in a lot of ways. We're looking into ourselves and looking into this joy that we have of the music, and there are some that really make an effort. Huberman is such an incredible example. He was someone that could have played everywhere. He was a famous man, made a lot of money. He could have made a lot of money and done really well. He chose to really dedicate so much to give back and help other people, and you also are an inspiration. So I'm at a point in my life where giving back to, for me, young kids, getting them interested in music is very important to me, and so I do enjoy that. So that's the next chapters of my life. Thanks for inspiring me.
Well, you've done work here in New York with the Education Through Music
yeah, that's
program?
one organization I'm involved with. It's called Education Through Music, which is bringing music programs to inner city schools that have no music programs at all. And I visited several of these schools in Harlem and the Bronx and others, and it's awesome and incredible what it does to these kids. Their self-esteem and their grades are going up, and so many great things are happening from music. I really do believe in that every child should have music as part of their curriculum, not just an elective after-school thing.
Part of the core, yeah. It struck me that while watching the movie that Huberman is kind of, he's maybe perhaps not quite as well known for this, but he's like a musical Raoul Wallenberg, a musical Varian Fry, the diplomat from New York who just went over on his own to France and got a lot of Europe's intelligentsia out in 39 and 40, and then came back. And to have that story told, that part of the story is really wonderful. Next question. Given that someone had arranged, I think this is a couple parts here, so stay with me. Given that someone had arranged to buy the violin before Joshua learned of it, did Joshua have to pay the previous would-be buyer something to be able to purchase the violin himself? Parentheses, question from a lawyer. I think that was understood.
Well, let's see. When I walked into the shop, this is the way I remember it. As I walked in the shop, they said, "Have you seen? We happen to have just today the Huberman violin, which I knew of because I explained in the movie that I had played a few notes on it when Norbert Breinen had it,
right.
and the part of the story that was not told on the thing is that we were rehearsing Mozart viola quintet with Norbert playing, and he let me play a few notes on the instrument. And it was a very touching moment, and I loved the violin, and he said, and he's very old, he said, well, maybe someday this will be your violin, and then he took a pause and said, if you could come up with $3 or $4 million. And so that was, and so anyway, the owners, Charles Beer actually was selling, the one who was the one that the violin was returned to, that they spent 9 months removing the grime from the 50 years of mistreatment of the violin, although it was not permanent, it was not terrible, it was not something that they couldn't reverse, but they took their time, 9 months removing some people say it was shoe polish that he put on there to sort of hide the looks of the Strad. But anyway, it was Charles Beer that was selling it, and they told me, they said, play on it. I was in love with it, and they said, unfortunately, it's leaving tonight for Germany, of all places, where some terrible industrialist is going to buy it. So that was the story they told me, and I said, no, you can't take it away. So I don't. I got to it before this person had the chance, and if that person ever existed, we'll see.
That's right. Mr. Rolat, did you ever, growing up in Poland, ever give the violin a shot when you were growing up as a young man?
No, well, you know, even during the war, it's amazing. I sometimes tell people about it, how important were concerts. Jews were not allowed to go to the movies, almost from the first day when the Germans entered Częstochowa. We also couldn't go to school. Frankly, for me, the bigger tragedy was not being able to go to movies than to school. But I can tell you that concerts, not allowed, but nevertheless, they were playing in those halls where, before the war, were movies. And I remember, you know, when we had, you know, some of the greatest musicians in Poland were Jews, similarly in Częstochowa. And I can tell you that we had, I remember one concert in particular, where actually in civilian clothes and so on, there were actually a few Germans who sneaked into the ghetto to be able to hear these illegal concerts. So music was played, and it was very, very important for us to hear these concerts, illegal concerts. You also can find out much more about it, about Warsaw and the Warsaw Ghetto, because there was one actually very important conductor whose music we now play quite often. As a matter of fact, I asked Marta here from our museum. Marta, I think you told me that some of his music, the name of this conductor and the composer? Panufnik? Yeah, actually, I don't know if you know his, and he actually, his music we're playing now in the museum, because it's very interesting to show actually in our museum how important was music, forbidden to be played, how many concerts in these ghettos were actually being played during the war.
People far more eloquent than me have said that a person is not dead if they are remembered by someone who is alive, and if the stories are told to other people. So, in front of this audience that is wrapping you in a symbolic embrace, can you tell us a little bit about your mom and dad?
Well, my father in Częstochowa, when the first trains for Treblinka left on September 22nd, which was the first day of Yom Kippur. And then subsequently, 5 more transports took 48,000 Jews to Treblinka. As I mentioned here, my father was one of those who was chosen for this horrible work to be done in Treblinka. It so happened that my father, in his younger years, he was very good at math, and actually, before he became a director of a factory, he was there an accountant. And they asked, do we have an accountant here? My father's duty in Treblinka consisted of writing up all the gold, as you know, golden teeth and so on, which was being shipped off to Germany.
Right.
Quite a bit of it to Switzerland, because Germany was selling their gold to Switzerland. And that's where my father was when these Jewish people, a few hundred of them, without any arms, rose up. And I'm very proud of that, of course 99 out of 100 of them were all killed, my father among them, but they destroyed the death factory. And my mother was with me actually in that munitions factory, and she was taken away on July 20, 1943. This was the last selection, actually. And as you could see in that movie, these people, about 600 of them, were all killed the next morning. So I lost my parents as I was the only, really, our family was small, just Jezik, my older brother, and myself, my father and my mother. So I would only like to say also to all of you here that we have a very vibrant, a very wonderful society of Jews, the World Society of Jews of Częstochowa and their descendants. From all over the world, we meet every 3 years. And we will have the next meeting in September of this year, hopefully with Joshua Bell playing at our Huberman Philharmonic, and as last time in our museum. In other words, we can make the deal right now, right? And so, of course, all of you are invited, and I promise you, it'll be really a wonderful, wonderful meeting when we next meet there.
One more for you, Joshua, and that is, how did you change the way you play the violin after you got the Huberman Strad?
Oh, well, you're suddenly, when you have a new violin, it's really fun. When you get a new instrument, it's a very exciting honeymoon period when you get an new instrument, because you lock yourself up in a room and you want to play every single piece you've ever learned, because all of a sudden you're able to do different colors, different sound color, you can play things on different strings that didn't work on the other ones, and then it suddenly opens up a whole new options of how you can approach the Tchaikovsky or the Brahms, and so it definitely affects all the possibilities, and then inspires you in different ways to play the piece in a different way, and makes you rethink the piece, and yeah, it's always very, very an exciting time when you get a new instrument. I've now had this one for 13 years, something like that. And part of me craves that sensation of getting a new instrument, so I keep my eye open for every once in a while. I think maybe I can get a second to have two, like Huberman did. They had two, or Heifetz, or they all had two. But it hasn't. Every time I go to another instrument, I go back to mine, and I think I might have loved the new instrument, then I go back to the Huberman. I shouldn't even say mine, because I have it for the time period. I paid for it, but it's not. I don't think of it as mine. I'm sort of a caretaker, I guess, for this next certain amount of time. But every time I go back to the Huberman violin, I think, no, this is the one.
The reporter in the far be it for a reporter to ask a dumb question, but the reporter in the film asked, "Can I touch it?" I start to cringe, like, "Oh yeah, you touch it." So I'm curious if even while people are walking by it, you could walk a little bit further away from it,
No, I mean, I'm very careful about it. It's like, people always ask me, are you worried about dropping it? I mean, I guess it's like asking a mother, are you worried about dropping your baby?
Yeah.
It's like, after a while you get used to it, and you don't think like that all the time. But it's just it's priceless, like a baby. And sure, it's insured, of course, but that doesn't really mean.
You talk about priceless. Incidentally, where somebody asked here, and you mentioned about how you paid $4 million, and you said, well, it's worth more. At that moment, I wanted to say that was a good investment.
Yeah.
It was a good.
Because I don't know.
Well, you are
you understand that because there are Stradivariuses and Stradivariuses. Now, that period and so on is generally accepted as the best of Stradivarius.
This violin was made in 1713, which is called the golden period of Strad. And yeah, I mean, no doubt, it's a great investment, something that my children will see the benefit of. Not me. I'll never.
But
in other words, believe me, if that Stradivarius ever maybe in another 50, 60 years, were to be auctioned off even at today's price, you couldn't get it for less than minimum about $25 to $30 million, minimum, and probably up, right?
But also think about the happiness that it's brought you. You know, no, seriously. And no, I mean, once you get past
Per minute? That's
Good point.
actually not bad. No, it's
Good
it's an amazing it's an amazing thing. And I'm sorry I didn't bring it with me today, but I thought I
we
would
got
have
one
shown
down-
it to you, but then you might have asked me to play, so I didn't bring it. You've heard way too much in the.
We have
the
one
film already.
downstairs. I think it costs about $100 or $150. It's pretty good. Mr. Rolat, one last thing for you, and that is, we see it in the film, but after all the work you've done to make this concert happen, and the violin is there, and Joshua Bell is there, in your hometown, can you bring us inside the room? Is there a way you can describe, as the concert begins, what's going through your mind?
Well, I was, as I mentioned here, I was really in a different world, a better world. But I can tell you that even then, that evening, and since then, I have yet one dream to realize. Whether it will ever happen, actually it will depend almost entirely on Joshua. But I'll tell you about my dream. Joshua knows about it because last time when we had a similar meeting in Amsterdam, I mentioned it. You see, Huberman had two violins. That violin that Stradivarius was stolen because he was playing on his Guarneri. He had two violins. Now you understand, a violinist can never play on two violins at the same time. And therefore, the musical world never heard the two violins at the same time. Now, I know now that the Guarneri is owned also by a well-known violinist. In fact, I brought that second violin in the hands of Midori. You heard her. Tu Częstochowa, about 2.5 years ago, when the Philharmonic was renamed after Huberman. So my dream actually is to have, let's say, the Bach beautiful.
She's not Jewish, you know. Just
I know. But imagine if you could hear the two violins in Bach concerto for two violins.
let's do it. I love Midori.
What?
We should do it. We should do it. Let's do it.
Really?
Yeah.
She,
If she's up for it, then we'll do it.
Well,
so there you are. Now you know my dream.
good. It's great to keep on having dreams. Joshua, for all the music that you've given us, especially personally those great nights at Tanglewood, under the stars, listening to you, we thank you for that. And Mr. Rolat, for still building positive bridges, we thank you for that as well. And thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.